pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You claim that the peoples of Africa are getting poorer because we give them more money in aid. How is that possible?
I ask myself that same question. It's been 60 years, over $1 trillion has gone to Africa. But if you look at growth and if you look at poverty, it's getting worse. Right now, over 60% of Africa is under the age of 24. Many Africans don't have job prospects. The political instability across the continent has not reduced. In 1970s, 10% of the population lived in dire poverty. It's now over 70% of the population that's living in dire poverty. And aid, unfortunately, brings in a lot of negative incentives. The governments behave badly, it discourages investment and entrepreneurship, and it disenfranchises Africans. So very often across the African continent, Africans are not able to hold their governments accountable for bad behavior.
But are you talking about all sorts of aid, or is it just bilateral state-to-state aid?
That's a very good question. There are basically three types of aid. There's humanitarian or emergency aid, and I think we should, as a global community, intervene when we see such tragedies as tsunami or earthquake. So I'm not talking about that type of aid. I'm also not talking about charitable aid, things like sending money for a scholarship. That's quite small money. I'm talking about the big...
you don't criticize?
Well, they have problems, don't get me wrong.
Okay.
And ultimately, we want a society where Africans don't have to rely on NGOs to provide schools and healthcare, roads and security. We want Africa to stand on its own as an equal partner on the global stage. And charitable aid, and in fact, not only NGOs, but government-to-government aid, which is what I'm criticizing, cannot deliver a situation where Africa can become an equal partner on the global stage.
So what should we do?
There are lots of things we can do. At the government level, we should be encouraging trade. We should be encouraging African governments to get off of aid and start to look for alternative ways of financing development, such as foreign direct investment, accessing the capital markets, through remittances. And on the individual level, we can support African entrepreneurs through microfinance, for example. So instead
like
of
the
giving
Grameen Bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of giving money to governments, you give money to individual African entrepreneurs. So, for example, a shoemaker in Kenya or a farmer in Ghana and so on. And there are ways to actually do that without the money going towards the government.
But why do you find it so wrong that celebrities like Bono does this charity work for Africa?
Bono has become, unfortunately, not just Bono, but the celebrity culture.
The Bob Geldof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They've become the face of Africa. And yet, Africans stand in the hot African sun, like many places around the world, to elect our leaders. So we, as Africans and the global community, should expect to hear from the African governments what they plan to do with regards to poverty in Africa. We don't want to hear the message coming from celebrities, especially since the message is very negative. They only focus on war, disease, corruption, and poverty. There are some bright spots in Africa. The message that these celebrities are carrying is not a message that can make Africans raise engineers and doctors and teachers and artists across the continent. It's a very negative message. It is not helping. It is the wrong message. We want to hear from African leaders. African leaders need to be incentivized so that they stand up and start to explain what their plan is for Africa's future.
Raymond is one of the politicians who is very proud of Norway because we give 1% of our GDP in aid. What would you like to say to him?
I would like to say that Africa would like to be like Norway, would like to be able to stand on its own 2 feet, like to be able to participate as an equal partner, not as a junior partner, not as a beggar, on the global stage. As we know, Norway did not become Norway today from sitting back and relying on other people to provide education, healthcare, security and infrastructure. The government in Norway provides an environment where entrepreneurs and private sector Norwegians can flourish and develop.
So how many percent should we give in aid?
Well, ultimately, the long-term goal, and I think we all agree on this, is that Africa should not be dependent on aid. Norway is not dependent on aid, nor is Sweden or Denmark or the UK or the US and so on. Yes, there are times, as I said, when we need to step in as a global society. My book is basically saying we need to actively start. This is an emergency situation. situation. We need to start having the discussion of how Africa is going to wean itself off of aid and become an equal partner on the global stage.
Some politicians have been thrilled and have read her book enthusiastically. Some hate her now for what she said. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I will commend her for raising this very important discussion. Definitely humanitarian assistance and aid itself, it's very complicated. And I'm very happy that you're divided between different types of aid, like humanitarian assistance, which you find necessary to continue to do. And I share also your view that state-to-state cooperation is extremely difficult. But I see aid as a gentle push to a government which is heading in the right direction. And that's often extremely difficult. But you find example also in Africa. I think a country like Botswana, Namibia and others, and hopefully also later Zambia, where they have clear exit strategy. When you enter in, you need to have clear exit strategies. But I know that also to put money into another country, then you easily become a part of the problem. And that discussion, I think we need to continue. Because we don't, and I want to use this hand, we don't want to do any harm. And easily also foreign aid can do a lot of harm, so we need to be cautious.
Yes.
So you agree on several points?
It sounds like it.
Yes, you do.
So that means we'll be turning off aid quite soon, I hope.
We will not do that. But I think to raise these discussions in a close cooperation, and the recipient, the countries themselves, they need to sit in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Not us.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And what I guess the fundamental problem is that aid allows African governments to take a back seat. They don't have to encourage Africans, they don't have to report to Africans as the government in Norway reports to the Norwegian people. That's not the case in Africa. In Africa, the governments can sit back and allow the Norwegians to provide us with health care, the Americans to provide infrastructure, the Chinese to provide electricity or whatever, and the governments basically do nothing. And that is fundamentally the problem, because they're still receiving money. And things like corruption are actually fueled by aid, because you're giving what is actually essentially free money to these governments. And very recently, my own government, the former president of my own country, is in the middle of a scandal right now of having stolen a lot of money and diverted funds. The president of Malawi, which is right next to my country in Zambia, just 6 weeks ago was charged with corrupt practices, stealing $12 million of aid money. It's not an old story, this corruption thing. It's still happening today. And the reason why they're able to steal this money is because it's coming from somewhere. It's aid money that they're stealing.
That's a part of the problem. It's of course not the whole problem.
Of course it's not, but it's a very large part of the problem, that these governments can stay in power, as we've seen many African governments stay in power over 40 years, because they have aid money to pay the military and to stay in power.
And now you're traveling around the world, making your point and urging these discussions. I just want to wish you all the best of luck, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.